poem here in the Close Reads Podcast Network. I'm David Kern. Today's poem is by a poet that you absolutely must know. That's Langston Hughes, James Mercer Langston Hughes. Lived from 1901 to 1967. He was a poet, activist, novelist, playwright. He is perhaps best known as a leader of the Harlem Renaissance in New York City. Wrote jazz poetry, as it's sometimes called. Given that the Harlem Renaissance was one of the most important artistic movements in American history, I do hope that you know Langston Hughes, at least a little bit. Today's poem is called The Negro Speaks of Rivers. It's a poem that was written when Langston Hughes was just 17, and according to Hughes' own telling, was written while he was on his way to visit his father in Mexico. This is how it goes. I've known rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood and human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. This is one of those poems that will stick with you. It sticks with me. I find it haunting and hopeful at the same time. Langston Hughes, of course, was speaking on behalf of so many African Americans who'd been enslaved and persecuted and treated so badly for so many centuries. His poem is one about freedom, but it's also one about death. I've heard it said that this is a poem both about death and deathlessness, and I think there's something to that, even though I'm not entirely sure that I know what it means. But I think in many ways, poems that haunt you like this, about difficult subjects, are the kind of poems that are worth keeping around, that are worth thinking about and reflecting on and having in your memory bank, poems you can call upon. It's not long and it's fairly easy to memorize, so I do think it is worth memorizing and having your students memorize if you're a teacher. I think one of the things that he's doing here is he's fighting against the so-called idea of progress, the idea that going from the Euphrates to the Congo to the Mississippi and to New Orleans, and even on to New York, which is where Langston Hughes ended up, that might be considered progress to many. But even in those ancient, dusky rivers, ancient is the world and older than the flow of human blood and human veins, there's just the same capacity for human flourishing. It may be a different sort of flourishing, but the human soul can flourish there just as well. And I think that's one of the things that Langston Hughes is getting at. Hughes gave voice to people who had been neglected. And for that reason alone, I believe we ought to read and know his poetry. We ought to respect and study what they were doing during the Harlem Renaissance. So maybe throw on some good jazz and memorize this poem. It will stick with you, I think. I believe you can find Hughes reading this poem online, YouTube, and places like that. So I recommend you do that and not just let my reading of it be the only one you hear. But again, The Negro Speaks of Rivers by Langston Hughes. I've known rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood and human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. This has been the Daily Poem. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back tomorrow with another one.